He grabbed my hair and yanked it in front of a crowd, his badge gleaming like permission. His grip not just on me, but on every black woman who'd ever been told to shrink. All I did was stand still. All I did was exist. And, for that, Officer Kurt Landon ripped my dignity from my scalp while Sergeant Damon Kessler stood watching, smirking, approving, silent. They thought I'd walk away broken. They thought no one would believe me. But they didn't know who I was. They didn't know the fire they'd just lit. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every voice they'd tried to silence. And now, the whole world was about to hear us scream. He grabbed my hair and yanked it so hard I stumbled back into the newsstand. You think you can ignore an officer? He barked, his breath sharp with coffee and rage. My scalp burned, my dignity shattered, and all around me phones were already raised, recording, gasping, judging. Why? Because I didn't answer fast enough. Because I, Maya Brooks, a 38-year-old black woman in a hoodie, stood still for 5 seconds too long, outside a corner store in my own neighborhood. And behind that officer stood Sergeant Damon Kessler, draped in his crisp blues and bulletproof arrogance, arms folded like a throne of judgment, a clipboard clutched like scripture, and the look of a man convinced his badge was God. I wasn't always this version of me, hardened, wounded, resisting. I used to be invisible in the best way. A teacher, a mother, a woman who blended into the hum of everyday life in South Garden, our little corner of Pennsylvania, where the traffic lights flickered longer than they should, and the corner bakery smelled like resilience. I taught 3rd grade at Marcus Elementary. The kids called me Miss Maya and told me I had the warmest voice. My daughter, Layla, all of 10, believed I was some kind of superhero, because I made soup from scratch and tucked her in with bedtime stories that made monsters into misunderstood friends. I never wanted a fight. I never wanted my face on anyone's screen. But it was Tuesday morning. I'd dropped Layla off early for music club. I stopped to get her favorite gummy bears from Jay's Deli. And that's where I stood still, half asleep outside the entrance, scrolling my phone, waiting for the rain to let up. The officer's name I'd later learn was Kurt Landon. But in that moment, he was just a force. His boots stomped toward me. His voice came like a blade. "Hey, you loitering." "No," I said gently, "just ID, now." I blinked. I live around here. I'm just... He moved faster than I thought a man his size could. Before I could even process his intent, he had one hand on my shoulder and the other ripping back the hood of my jacket. My curls, thick and coiled, caught in his fingers. His grip closed like punishment. I cried out. Not from pain, but from something deeper. From humiliation. From the sheer disbelief that this was real, that this could happen in daylight on a sidewalk still wet with the morning's drizzle. "Comply, or you'll be detained," he growled. "For what?" I shouted, my voice cracking. What law did I break? The crowd had grown. A woman with a stroller. A man in a delivery van. Teenagers in hoodies, phones angled. I heard gasps. One woman shouted, "Let her go." But Kessler didn't flinch. He stood there watching, like a wolf training his cub, like he wanted this to escalate. I saw it then, not just the abuse, but the theater, the sick ritual. This wasn't about law. This was about control. Landon finally let go. My head snapped forward as if he'd released a trap. He sneered. "Next time, don't ignore a directive." I turned. I should have walked away. I almost did. But something inside me, a fracture or a flame I'm not sure, made me look him dead in the eye. You don't get to treat people like that. Not anymore. He laughed. You people. You got all the rights in the world, but you still act like victims. And that's when I knew this wasn't over. That night, my scalp still throbbed. I couldn't eat. Layla asked why I was quiet. I told her I was tired. I didn't tell her the video had already gone viral. I didn't tell her about the comments some righteous others cruel. I didn't tell her about the anonymous number that called 3 times then hung up. I just held her a little tighter when she fell asleep. At 1:12 a.m., I opened my phone again. The video had hit 11,000 shares. One clip, 37 seconds, had rewritten who I was to the world. And somewhere in the comments buried deep was one that caught my breath. She should sue. That's assault. The thought pulsed in me like a second heartbeat. I stared at the ceiling. I remembered Kessler's face. I remembered how still he stood. How proud. How amused. I wasn't just a woman humiliated. I was a warning to anyone who dared question a man like him. But I wasn't going to stay that way. I turned on the light. I sat up. And for the first time in my life, I started writing down everything I remembered. Every word. Every second. Every breath. Because this time I wasn't going to disappear. This was no longer just about me. This was a war that had started long before I was born. And now it had my name written in it. The morning after it happened, the world moved like it didn't know I was broken. The sun still rose, mocking me with its warmth. Buses still hissed to stops. Kids still laughed on sidewalks, and the coffee machine at school still gurgled like nothing had changed. But I had. I sat in the teacher's lounge at Marcus Elementary, clutching my thermos like it was some kind of shield. My colleague Denise leaned over her face, a portrait of concern. Maya. That video. I saw it. Her voice trembled. I can't believe they did that to you. I smiled, or tried to. I can. I didn't want to be brave. I just wanted to feel safe again, in my own skin. But fear had taken up space in my rib cage. And shame, that old familiar specter, whispered that maybe I had looked suspicious, maybe I had been too slow to respond. But then I'd close my eyes and feel his fingers in my hair, and I'd remember, no, this wasn't my fault. At lunch, Principal Hamden called me into her office. Her voice was all protocol. Miss Brooks, we're placing you on temporary leave with pay. It's just until things cool off. We've received a few complaints from parents about inappropriate political behavior. Political, I asked, heat creeping up my neck. They saw the video, she replied quickly. Some believe it creates a distraction. A distraction. Not the assault, not the abuse. Me. I walked out silent, my steps heavy as thunder. Outside, Layla's drawing one she'd made of me in a cape still clung to my classroom window with crooked tape. I wanted to rip it down, but I didn't. That night I cried. But I didn't cry alone. Denise came over with wine. My sister Brianna called from Georgia. Maya, she said, if you don't fight this, he wins. Not just over you, over every black woman who's been told to be small, polite, and visible. And that's when the fire inside me started to rise. I wasn't an activist. I wasn't a lawyer. I was a woman who taught multiplication and bought gummy bears for her kid. But maybe that's exactly why my story mattered. I spent that week learning. I watched videos. I read about women like Sandra Bland. I listened to survivors. I emailed the ACLU. I called civil rights attorneys. And in the quiet of midnight, I opened a folder on my desktop titled The Truth. Inside, I placed everything: screenshots, timestamps, eyewitness messages. On Friday, I met attorney Elias Wright. He was younger than I expected, mid-30s, black, sharp suit, sharper eyes. He didn't smile much, but when I told him everything, he said 5 words that rooted into my soul. "You're not the first or the last." He agreed to represent me, not just for civil damages, but for federal violation of civil rights under color of law. It sounded huge. It was huge. "Are you ready for what comes?" he asked me. "Smear campaigns, public scrutiny, digging through your past." "No," I said honestly, "but I'm doing it anyway." News of the lawsuit hit local media the following week. Channel 9 ran a segment, "Local Teacher Files Suit Against South Garden PD Claims Hair Was Ripped Out." I hated their tone. I hated the quotes around ripped out as if it was some fable I'd invented. But I also saw the other comments. Women, especially black women, writing, "We see you. We believe you. Your pain is ours too." One of them, a nurse named Aisha, organized a candlelight vigil. The night of it, Layla stood beside me in a pink hoodie, gripping my hand like it was an anchor. The crowd wasn't huge, but it was enough. Enough to remind me I wasn't alone anymore. A news van pulled up. I almost turned away. But then I stepped toward the camera. My voice shook, but I spoke. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for justice. Not just for me, but for my daughter, and for anyone who's been treated like they don't belong." And in that moment, I felt the tide shift. The police department went quiet. No statement, no apology, just silence. But silence speaks. Silence tells you they're scared. Or worse, strategizing. I stayed off social media, but the world didn't. 2 days later, it happened again, this time to a 17-year-old boy named DeAndre. Slammed to the pavement. Same officer, same pattern. But this time, he knew what to do. He screamed, "Film it. My name is DeAndre Turner, and this is assault." The video went viral too. But now the people watching had context. Now there was a pattern. Now there was a name. Now there was a fight. I received a message that night from a stranger. I was assaulted by Officer Landon in 2019. I never spoke up. Watching you gave me courage. Can I help? My hands trembled as I typed back. Yes, please. By week's end, we were 9. 9 victims. 9 voices. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't just building a case. I was building an army, not of warriors, but of witnesses. And that terrified them more than any gun ever could. The days that followed moved like storms, quiet at first, then deafening. Everywhere I went, eyes followed. Some were kind, others were suspicious. But the silence I feared most came from the South Garden Police Department. No apology, no denial. Just calculated stillness like wolves watching from the dark. Then came the leak. On a rainy Thursday morning, attorney Elias Wright forwarded me an encrypted file. "You'll want to sit down," he said. My hand hesitated over the mouse before I opened it. It was body cam footage from Officer Kurt Landon. From that day, I expected shaky footage, unclear audio, some distortion. But what I saw turned my stomach. Landon approaches me. The recording is crisp, undeniable. His tone already carries a threat. I reply calmly. Then, the moment his hand reaches out and grabs my hair. But this time, with sound and angle preserved by his own camera, the force is clearer, uglier, and more deliberate than I remembered. But it was what happened next that changed everything. Sergeant Damon Kessler appears behind him in the frame. He's smirking, watching, and then he says it almost casually. Good. Show him who runs this block. The screen froze. My breath stopped. This wasn't about law enforcement. This was about domination, ritual, racism baked into routine. Elias whispered, "That sentence changes everything." We filed a motion to include the footage in our case. The internet exploded. Civil rights lawyers across the country began commenting. A federal judge approved the motion and unsealed the body cam. Within hours, national news picked it up. And that's when the threats started. You're dividing this town. You're a liar. You're going to ruin these men's lives over a misunderstanding. But I wasn't alone. Not anymore. DeAndre's mother, Rochelle, called me in tears. I was scared, she said. But your voice gave me mine back. More women came forward. Not just from South Garden, from surrounding towns, from other states. Similar stories, same patterns. And slowly the narrative changed. What had been a single woman with a claim became a coalition of voices. We weren't yelling, we were testifying. At a press conference downtown, Elias stood beside me. Behind us stood 9 other victims, each of them holding a photo of the day they were targeted. This is not about revenge, Elias told the cameras. It's about accountability. These officers did not just break protocol, they broke people. That same day, the mayor, Lisa Bertrand, broke her silence. We take these allegations seriously, she said. Effective immediately, Sergeant Kessler is suspended pending investigation. It was the crack we needed. I drove home that night past the same corner where it all began. The deli was still there. The same flickering neon sign. But now, taped to the window, someone had written, "We stand with Maya." I parked and just sat there for a moment, letting the rain blur my vision. Not from sorrow, but from awe. They tried to bury me, but I was a seed. Inside my apartment, Layla sat cross-legged on the floor sketching a new drawing. "What's that baby?" I asked, kneeling beside her. She smiled, missing one front tooth. "It's you, but you're a tree, and all the people are holding onto your branches." I cried then. For the first time since this all began, I let myself cry not from pain, but from pride. Because somehow, by standing up for myself, I had become something for others to lean on. But I knew we weren't done. Not yet. That night I received a call from an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. A man's voice, steady, grave. "You don't know me," he said. "But I'm a retired officer, and I've got something you'll want to see. It's about Kessler." My heart pounded. "What kind of something?" He paused. "Proof that what happened to you wasn't the first time he ordered it, and that your case might just tear the whole damn wall down." I met him in the back booth of a diner that still smelled like cigarettes despite the ban. His name was Carl Dandridge, former lieutenant retired 5 years ago from the South Garden PD. He wore his badge on a chain around his neck, not in pride, but as if he couldn't take it off even if he wanted to. His eyes were tired. His hands trembled as he slid a flash drive across the table. "I should have spoken up years ago," he said. But I was afraid. Kessler had friends in every corner. You didn't rise in that department unless you followed his rules or turned your head. I didn't say anything. I just nodded, lips tight. He continued. "In 2017, there was a kid, black, 17, caught riding his bike past curfew. Kessler made an example out of him. Had Landon throw him on the squad car and twist his arm out of socket. I wrote it up. Internal Affairs buried it. I kept copies. 'What's on the drive?' I asked. He looked around, then leaned closer. Everything they covered up. Complaints, footage, emails between Kessler and the city attorney. He didn't just abuse people, he trained others to do the same. My fingers curled around the flash drive like it was made of fire. Why now? Carl's voice cracked. Because watching that man rip your hair, it broke something in me. I saw my granddaughter in your face. I left the diner trembling, but not with fear, with fury. That night, Elias examined the files. It was worse than we thought. A decade of complaints ignored. Officers shuffled to other departments. One woman had been paid off quietly and moved out of state. And then, buried deep in an archived folder, we found a training memo written by Kessler himself, titled Controlling Urban Resistance. It wasn't even coded. It spoke openly of assertive demonstrations of control, especially in neighborhoods prone to emotional escalation. We sent the files to the press. We sent them to the Department of Justice. And within 24 hours, the world ignited. CNN, MSNBC, even The Guardian ran headlines. Leaked files expose systemic abuse in South Garden PD. Protesters gathered outside the station this time, not just locals, but people from across the state. Nurses, college students, grandmothers, men in suits and women in scrubs. And in the center of it all, Layla and I holding hands. They held up signs. Her hair is not a handle. Accountability is not optional. I am Maya. And then the unthinkable happened. Sergeant Damon Kessler held a press conference. He stood stiff, jaw tight, flanked by lawyers. His voice, usually full of condescension, now held the crackle of desperation. There have been misunderstandings, he said. Errors in protocol. But I have always served this community with integrity. The crowd watching on the live stream booed. I watched from my living room, fists clenched. And then I saw it, something in his eyes. Panic, because now the system was shaking. The silence was broken. Later that evening, a member of the city council, Lourdes Ramirez, reached out privately. Maya, she said, we want you to testify in the upcoming hearing. On the record. Before the committee votes on suspensions and criminal referrals. My throat dried. What will it mean? That your words will be public. And that you'll become the face of this case. I looked at Layla, who sat on the floor sketching again this time, drawing a courthouse with sunlight behind it. I'll do it, I said. I'll speak. That weekend, the church down the street opened its doors for a town hall. I didn't plan to speak, but the moment I walked in, applause erupted. People I didn't know stood up for me. And then DeAndre Turner's mother stepped up to the podium. She didn't shout. She just read aloud the names of those who had come forward, names we'd protected for so long. Her voice didn't break until the last name, her own son's. I took the microphone with shaking hands. I didn't ask for this, I began. But if telling my story means others won't suffer in silence, then I will speak until I lose my voice. The church roared. And in that noise I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Power, not the kind Kessler wielded from behind a badge. Real power, the kind that blooms when truth meets courage. But with power comes risk. That night, someone threw a brick through our window. A note attached read, "Stay quiet or get hurt." I held Layla close, my heart pounding. The next morning, we moved into a safe location arranged by the legal team. Elias increased security. But I didn't stop. I wouldn't stop. Because now I knew this wasn't just about one woman's pain. It was about every voice they tried to silence. And we were done whispering. The courtroom smelled like old wood and stale air, like history trapped in its own mistakes. I sat there, my palms slick with sweat, staring at the seal of justice engraved above the bench, and wondering how many women like me had walked into rooms like this, hearts pounding truths, trembling on their tongues. I wore blue, navy, simple, strong. Layla gave me her little friendship bracelet that morning. It's lucky she whispered. I didn't have the heart to tell her I didn't believe in luck anymore. I believed in truth. I believed in fire. When they called my name, I rose, and I walked into that silence like it was war. The committee hearing was public. Cameras everywhere. Journalists scribbling. But the front row was filled with people who mattered more. Denise, Brianna, Carl Dandridge, Rochelle and DeAndre. Survivors, witnesses, warriors. I took the stand. The oath felt heavier than I expected. Do you swear to tell the truth? Yes. Yes, I do. Elias gave me a nod. It was time. I'm Maya Brooks. I said, my voice steady despite the quake beneath. I'm a teacher, a mother, a citizen of South Garden. And on April 4th, I was assaulted by Officer Kurt Landon in broad daylight. My hair was grabbed, my body was restrained, my dignity was stolen. And behind it all stood Sergeant Damon Kessler, who watched and approved. I told them everything. Not just about the incident, but the days before it, how I'd taught spelling to third graders, how I bought gummy bears for my daughter, how I stood outside a store waiting for rain to pass. I spoke of the hand in my hair, the burn in my scalp, the way shame poured over me like gasoline. I recited Kessler's words from the body cam. I played the footage. I let the silence that followed hang in the room like smoke. Then I pulled out the flash drive. These are the files provided by a retired officer, I said. They prove this wasn't an isolated incident. They prove that systemic abuse has been allowed trained in this department. These aren't accusations. These are facts. The judge's brow furrowed. The council members whispered among themselves. And then came cross-examination. The department's attorney stood slick in a gray suit and a voice like sandpaper dipped in honey. Miss Brooks, he began, you claim this was racially motivated. But how can you prove the officer wasn't simply responding to a perceived threat? I wasn't a threat, I said calmly. I was a woman on a sidewalk. The only thing that made me dangerous was being black and unafraid. Murmurs rippled. He pressed on. But you raised your voice. Couldn't that have been misinterpreted as aggression? I leaned forward. When you're being violated, silence is surrender. I chose to scream. He faltered, tried to pivot. Do you think your public platform is influencing others to fabricate claims? No, I replied. I think my platform is giving them the courage to stop being silent about truths they've carried for years. He had no more questions. But then the final witness was called, Carl Dandridge. He took the stand, shoulders square, voice low but firm. He confirmed everything. The complaints, the cover-ups, the toxic culture Kessler cultivated. They called it control, Carl said. But it was fear. Racialized, institutionalized fear. We didn't serve the community. We subdued it. His words were the final crack, and then the judge recessed. We stepped outside into the blinding afternoon sun. Reporters swarmed. Microphones reached. But I kept my head high. I didn't need to yell. I'd already been heard. That evening, the committee announced their preliminary ruling. Officer Kurt Landon was placed on unpaid suspension pending federal charges. Sergeant Damon Kessler was stripped of his badge and charged with obstruction and conspiracy. An independent review board would audit every complaint filed in the last decade. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just closed my eyes and breathed. It was only the beginning. But it was the beginning we needed. That night, back at the safe house, Layla crawled into my lap. "Did you win, Mommy?" I wrapped my arms around her. "I didn't win," I said softly. "But we made them stop running." She smiled, half asleep. "You're still my hero." I kissed her forehead, not because I was brave, but because I was finally whole. The morning after the hearing, something in the air had shifted. I stepped outside to find the street quiet, not the silence of fear, but the hush of reflection. The kind of quiet that settles in just before a storm passes when people are still holding their breath, unsure whether to cheer or cry. Every corner of South Garden now bore signs of awakening. Handwritten posters on brick walls read, "We believe Maya." Someone had chalked Justice Grows roots along the school crosswalk. Even the morning news anchors, usually so sterile, now spoke with a tremble in their voices as they recapped the hearing. But this wasn't over. Not for me, not for us. That same afternoon, city officials announced a community town hall. Not a formality, an emergency session. Open to the public. To address the broken trust between law enforcement and citizens. I was invited to speak again. I said yes before they even finished asking. At the town hall, the auditorium was packed to the exits. Residents, reporters, teachers, janitors, pastors, grocery clerks, all there, not just to witness, but to participate. It felt different from the courtroom. More electric, more human. On stage, I faced not only city leaders, but also newly emboldened citizens who'd once been silent. One after another, they stepped up. An elderly man recalled being stopped and frisked 3 times in 1 week. A teenage girl recounted her brother's arm being broken during a mistaken ID. A nurse confessed to being afraid of calling 911 when her neighbor needed help, afraid because the neighbor was black and mentally ill. Truth poured out like floodwaters from a cracked dam. When it was my turn, I didn't read from notes. I looked at the faces, some hopeful, some haunted, and said, "We all want to believe we live in a just town. But justice without accountability is a performance. We need real reform, real oversight, and not just when the cameras are on." The applause was thunder. Then Lourdes Ramirez, the councilwoman who'd supported me from the shadows, stood. Her voice was trembling but resolute. "I propose the formation of a civilian-led police oversight committee, one with full subpoena power, one that includes survivors like Maya Brooks." The room exploded, cheers, tears, and then something none of us expected. Mayor Lisa Bertrand stood, and she said the words I had waited months to hear. "On behalf of this city, Miss Brooks, I am sorry." I felt my knees weaken. Not because I believed her apology would heal everything it wouldn't, but because those words, when spoken before thousands, shift culture. She continued, "We failed you. We failed so many. And if we don't act now, we don't deserve this city." That night, I returned home to find Layla already asleep on the couch, cradling a picture of us taped beside the word free. I sat beside her and whispered, "They heard us, baby." But there was one last voice we hadn't heard from yet. The Department of Justice. 3 days later, they announced a full civil rights investigation into the South Garden Police Department. Systemic bias, pattern of abuse, cover-ups. The words echoed across every station. Kurt Landon was arrested and charged under Title 18, Section 242 of the U.S. Code for depriving me of my rights under color of law. His bail was denied. Kessler fled the state. But he didn't get far. The U.S. Marshals caught him in a motel outside Toledo, Ohio. He was booked under conspiracy to obstruct justice with the added weight of tampering with evidence. But it wasn't just about them anymore. It was about every person who once thought speaking up would cost them everything now, realizing it might just save someone else. Carl Dandridge started a nonprofit for ex-officers turned whistleblowers. Rochelle was organizing a scholarship fund for black youth pursuing law and justice. And me, I went back to Marcus Elementary. My first day back, the kids stood and clapped. One of them, little Jordan, blurted out, "Miss Maya, you're famous." I smiled. "Only if you promise not to let it go to my head." But later that day, during reading time, a student quietly asked me, "Were you scared when that man hurt you?" I didn't lie. "Yes," I said. But being scared doesn't mean you stop. It means you keep going even when your voice shakes. That night, I hosted a backyard dinner. My sister flew in. Elias showed up with his fiancée. The table was full of people who had once only known each other through courtrooms and protest lines, but who now laughed like family. As the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Denise raised a glass. To Maya, not just for surviving, but for leading. I shook my head. "No," I said, "to all of us, for refusing to be quiet." And just like that, without fanfare, without a headline, healing began. But there was still one chapter left, because victory isn't when the gavel falls. It's when the system you feared finally fears the people it once dismissed. It happened under an open sky sunlight pouring over the courthouse steps like an anointing. That morning, I stood in front of a sea of faces, hundreds gathered not in protest anymore, but in celebration. No tear gas, no fear, just breath, just truth, just people who had remembered how to stand. The final ruling had come down. A federal judge in bold, undeniable language declared that the South Garden Police Department had engaged in a pattern and practice of unconstitutional behavior. The court mandated sweeping reform oversight retraining civilian review boards. But most powerful of all, restitution. To each victim, to each family silenced, including me. I wasn't supposed to win. Women like me in towns like this weren't supposed to speak too loudly. But here I was, no longer just Maya Brooks' third-grade teacher. I was a chapter in history now, and yet the most important moment didn't come from a judge. It came from a little girl, Layla. She stood beside me on the courthouse steps, her small hand gripping mine, her voice brave as a lion. She looked out at the cameras and strangers and said into the microphone, "My mommy taught me to use my words, and she used hers so people would listen. Now I know being quiet isn't always safe, but being brave is how we change the world." They clapped. They cried. And somewhere in the crowd, even the press lowered their cameras to wipe their eyes. I was asked that day what I planned to do with the settlement money. My answer: I donated most of it to launch the Brooks Foundation for Justice in Education, a fund for young girls of color who wanted to study law, politics, journalism, and truth. Because I didn't want statues. I wanted successors. I went back to my classroom full time. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Because in the eyes of every child who asked, "Why did they do that to you, Miss Maya?" I saw the future being formed. I saw minds that wouldn't forget. And the community, they remembered. The corner where it all began, outside Jay's Deli, was renamed Brooks Square. Not because I needed recognition, but because the city needed to remind itself what happened when one woman said enough. Officer Kurt Landon was convicted. 5 years in federal prison. No early release. Kessler took a plea. 10 years. Public apology read aloud in court, every word of it forced through clenched teeth. Did it fix everything? No. But justice isn't a light switch. It's a sunrise. Slow, relentless, inevitable. Some days people still approach me in grocery stores, their eyes wide with memory. "Are you the woman from the video?" they whisper. I used to flinch. Now I smile. Yeah, that's me. Because I am no longer that trembling woman on a sidewalk, flinching under a hand that treated my hair like rope. I am the voice that broke silence. I am the proof that change comes not from anger, but from endurance. I am the reminder that courage is contagious. And I am the mother of a girl who now walks taller because her mother refused to bow. If you're reading this wondering if it's worth it, if speaking up, standing tall, pushing back will ever matter, know this: they will come for your voice. They will question your truth. They will try to make you kneel. But if you plant your feet, if you breathe, if you speak anyway, you will not stand alone, because once one of us rises, the rest will remember how to follow. This was never just my story. It's ours, and we're just getting started. In a world where silence is expected and injustice wears a uniform, one woman's voice shattered the system. What began with humiliation turned into a national reckoning. And Maya Brooks proved that you don't need power to start a revolution, only courage. Her story reminds us that pain, when spoken aloud, becomes strength, and truth, when pursued relentlessly, can bring even giants to their knees. The meaning of life. It's not to stay safe. It's to stand up when it matters. It's to teach the next generation that dignity is non-negotiable, and that real change begins when ordinary people refuse to be quiet. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think, don't just scroll past. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful true-life dramas that expose injustice and uplift voices that matter. Drop a comment below. Let us know what part hit you hardest, or share your own story. Like this video if you believe in the power of truth. And remember, when we speak, they can't ignore us.